Okay, so the question we want to look at today is going to be about the mayors essentially and regional devolution. So in the past we've had quite a few questions about devolution. It's usually been around about English Parliament or sometimes about Scottish, Welsh, Northern Ireland devolution. But I can really envisage this question which is going to be about the mayors and maybe about whether or not it's complete. Have we done too much of it, not enough of it, and how far has it been successful or unsuccessful? So we're going to look at that today. Now, before we delve into how the question is actually going to work, what we're going to do is have a look at some examples that you might want to bring up when you go through this. First off, it's really important to understand which regions in the UK have a mayor, as you can see at the moment, and this is going to be an important part of the answer that we deliver. Quite a few of the places with a mayor at the moment are all in the north of England. Now, some of the most famous mayors that you're going to want to mention. Obviously, in London, you've got Sadiq Khan. He's been a London mayor now for 10 years. You have got Andy Burnham in Manchester. Now, obviously, I'm recording this in May 2026. He might be Prime Minister by the time you're watching this. If not, he'll still be the Mayor of Manchester, I presume. And so he's a really good case study for us to talk about here. You have got Tracy Brabin, who is the Mayor for West Yorkshire. And you've got Ben Houchin, who's the only Conservative on the list, and he's the Mayor for the Tees Valley. So what we'll do now is give you some examples that you might be able to use in this essay. So I'm going to give you 6 examples of actions taken by the different mayors, and we're going to be able to use these as we go through the essay. So first off, one of the biggest powers of the London mayor is their control over the transport network. And since the year 2000, we've seen the London mayors introduce the Oyster card. We have seen free travel for under 16-year-olds. We have seen the introduction of the congestion charge. And in 2019, Sadiq Khan introduced the ultra-low emission zone, otherwise known as ULEZ. Now, how we're going to weave this into some of our essays, I think, is think about the success of it. And if we just took ULEZ as a good example of that, reports have indicated there's been a 27% drop in nitrogen oxide levels across London since its introduction. That's led to a 10.2% decrease in respiratory issues. It's also meant that more people are more likely to be at work, and so it's really benefiting the UK and the London economy particularly. So that's one good early example for us to use. Now, second one I want to talk about, and this is where it becomes really interesting because obviously the London mayor has got huge powers over transport. Most of the other mayors do not. Andy Burnham in Manchester pushed to be given those types of powers. And he did it because he said that essentially the Manchester's economy was not operating the way it should do, and that people find it very hard to get from one part of Manchester to another part of Manchester. So, as Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham has been given these powers. He's actually created the B network, which is the first re-regulation of bus services outside of London since the 1980s. So in the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher deregulated the buses. And what that meant is that bus companies decided where they ran buses, how often they ran buses. And Andy Burnham said, no. As a government, what we need to do is we need to ensure that people can be dependent on the transport network, on buses, and when they turn up. And so he created the B network, which guarantees buses to arrive at certain points in time. It also brings all of the different elements, the tram and the bus network, all together under the same framework. And the success of that has been actually getting quite stark. So the number of people using the bus network in Manchester has increased by 14%. And now what we see as well is 80% of buses arriving on time compared to 66% before re-regulation. Sometimes these things seem minor, but if you're a company trying to set up in somewhere in the UK, one of the things you will look for is look at what their transport network is like and how dependable it is. Another thing to talk about would be about the power the mayor has over policing. Now, again, we can talk about the asymmetrical nature of this because this is something that the London mayor has power over, but the other mayors do not. So a good example here would be in 2022, where Sadiq Khan essentially fired the head of the Met Police, Crescenda Dick. He just said he'd lost faith on her and her ability to change the culture of the Met Police, which was seen to be quite misogynistic at the time. Now, has it been a success? Not sure. It's probably too early days to see whether or not the Met Police has changed its ways. But what it does demonstrate is the huge level of power that the London mayor has over policing, and moreover, why therefore it would be a good idea to extend this to the other mayors. Okay, so staying on the theme of the London Mayor and their power over policing, one interesting policy to look at was the decision by Sadiq Khan to set up something called a violent reduction unit in London. And he did that, and it was based on a model they used in Glasgow, which is quite controversial. But statistics actually suggest it's been a success. And in 2025, London recorded its lowest ever homicide rate since records began. Now, obviously, you might read in the newspaper the idea that London is some sort of epicenter of violent crime, but the statistics don't actually bear that out. Yeah, there's loads of other crime in different areas, but actually, in terms of murder rates, London's got its lowest ever homicide rate, and that's a massive success. And whether or not it's linked to the violence reduction unit, it's hard to say. The two do match up somewhat. Now, on a different note, let's go to West Yorkshire and Tracy Brabin. Now, Tracy Brabin, she does not have the powers that Andy Burnham has in Manchester or Sadiq Khan has in London. What she does have is the ability to advocate for West Yorkshire particularly. And what she's been doing is to go around the world and trying to drum up trade and business for West Yorkshire. Now, particularly West Yorkshire's got a kind of real thriving medical tech industry going on. And she's been going around the world, and her trip, where she's gone to Nashville, Tennessee in the United States, has been essentially able to drum up more business for West Yorkshire, increase trade between West Yorkshire and the United States. And so it shows here that she's got this kind of role where she's able to drum up business. And you can't imagine a scenario in which the British government themselves are going out necessarily and advocating for particular regions of the UK. It shows you the power that the mayor has. And again, on a kind of quite similar note here, they can be quite innovative. And so here you've got a Conservative mayor, Ben Houchin. He's the mayor for the Tees Valley. And he's really led on the regeneration and creation of what they call the Tees Valley Freeport. A freeport is where you wouldn't pay taxes on the goods that come in and out of that port. And it's meant, again, to drive up business in the area. Now, again, it's quite controversial. A lot of people don't like the way Ben Houchin's done it, but it has created over 2,000 jobs in the region, and predicted over the next 10 years or so to create around 18,000 jobs. So again, you've got a scenario in which you've got a local mayor who's driving change and driving regeneration in a particular area, and that's something that maybe people around the rest of the country feel they could benefit from too. Okay, so what we're going to do is start with the introduction here. And first off, you're going to be really clear about what your argument is. Your argument, I think, should be that devolution has been a massive success, and therefore it's incomplete because it should go further. What we always want to do is find some sort of level of criteria to judge this on. And I think the easiest criteria for us to use here is actually the most recent government white paper on this. So for context, in December of 2024, Angela Rayner, who was then the Deputy Prime Minister, she published a white paper on further devolution. That paper unequivocally said that there should be more devolution in the UK. And what's really, really helpful about this is they gave a couple of core reasons as to why we should have more devolution. What we can do is we can use these as some of the paragraph ideas and themes as we go through the essay. Okay, so the first thing the white paper said was that there's a need for all citizens to benefit from devolution. So as it stands, what you have is a scenario where some people in the UK have a devolved regional government and others do not. That's creating a postcode lottery where some people get more advantages than others. There's also, just the very simple fact that it puts power into local communities to solve local problems and problems that only they suffer from and therefore they can solve. And then finally, it will lead to more visible leadership and accountability. And what we're going to try and do here is take these three ideas and we're going to try and expand on them, and we're going to use these as our paragraph themes. So the first point we're going to make here is that devolution is incomplete, and the reason why it's incomplete is that too many people still do not have access to a mayor. So to give you some statistics on this, around about 61% of UK citizens have a mayor, so that's just less than 2/3. Now, if we go a little bit deeper into this, what you will know is that a lot of the regional mayors we have been what we call devolution by deal. And what that means is some areas have different powers, and there's different levels of accountability also that exist between the different regions. So this is creating what we would call asymmetrical devolution. And the question you'd have to ask yourself is, hang on, why not give all the mayors the same power? Surely if it works in one area, it could work in another area. Now, the UK government does not like giving up power. They like the power to be held centrally. But what we've seen is that when it's happened, it's been a success. So if we were going to make devolution even more of a success and to complete the process of regional devolution, why not give all the mayors the same level of power? Rid of that asymmetrical devolution, and that's a key word to use here in this essay. On top of that, it's really important to say that whilst 90% of the north of England has a mayor, just 46% of the south has one. And what that's creating is what you call a postcode lottery, whereby some citizens will take the benefit of a mayor, while others, and despite the fact they might be geographically very, very close, do not. So an example that comes to mind I know of would be that, I know if you are a student who attends a school in London and you live in London, you get free bus travel. If you are a student who lives in one of the kind of home counties on the outside, say Surrey, for example, you do not get free bus travel, despite the fact you may be going into a London school. And so that's just unfair. Why don't we make sure that all the different regions in the UK all have access to a mayor? So try to think now how you would debate that argument. What's your however point going to be? And I think here what you really want to go on about is the whole nature of devolution, why it was done in the first place 15 years or so ago. And really, it was trying to right this long-standing wrong, which was that there was too much power, too much influence being held, in Westminster and in London particularly. London had a mayor. London was zooming ahead of the UK in terms of economic growth, in terms of population growth, and the rest of the UK was being left behind. So this has been demonstrated, I think, really brilliantly by Manchester and its mayor Andy Burnham. So since being mayor, Manchester has actually become, very, very different city to what it was 10 years or so ago. And we know that in the last decade, Manchester's experienced around about 3.1% economic growth. That is almost double that of the rest of the UK. So the point I'm trying to get at with this is that actually, I think one of the things to say is that, well, we don't need devolution or any further devolution in the south of England. What we need to be doing is giving more powers to our mayors in the north of England, just like we have with Andy Burnham in Manchester. And that will help to drive this regional growth. So that's a really important point to make here, I think, to say, which is that, our original argument is that you should have devolution everywhere. And I said, no. Let's go back to the original purpose of devolution, which was to try and ensure that there's much more kind of regional parity between the north of England and London. And you know what? These devolved settlements actually have done that. If we try and give more devolution down to the south of England, again, we might just see that kind of inequality creeping back up again. So the second core point we're going to make here is that devolution has been a success. And it's been a success because it allows local communities to solve local problems. And with that in mind, we should definitely extend it further, because all regions of the UK should have the ability to solve problems that are very unique to them. Now, what we're going to do here is the example I would like to use is again from Manchester. So what we saw in Manchester is between 2010 and 2017, homelessness and rough sleeping rose by 554%. That is huge. Now, between 2017 and 2021, when Manchester had a mayor who could lead on these local issues, there was a 57% reduction in the number of those recorded sleeping rough. Now, obviously, the number, as you can see here in 2020, is still quite a lot higher than the number recorded in 2010. But nevertheless, has been this reduction. So you have got now somebody who's actually accountable for issues in Manchester, particularly here rough sleeping. They create kind of bespoke schemes for their area, things like a bed every night. The emergency accommodation scheme has been really, really helpful in Manchester, and that has had this effect of bringing down rough sleeping across the region. So really, really powerful. Okay, so second example I want to give you on this one is something we've kind of already talked about at the start of the video. Relates to West Yorkshire. Now, West Yorkshire is the home of NHS England. It also has Europe's largest teaching hospital there, and the health tech industry employs around about kind of 100,000 people in the region. So this is a big thing for West Yorkshire. And what you've got now is we're giving them a local mayor. They can focus on that local, really core issue for them. Okay, so they can go out, and Tracy Brabin has been out to Tennessee, has been out and tried to make more links with pharmaceutical companies in the United States where they can trade with one another. Now, you have to ask yourself, if you had a non-specialist, if you had a civil servant from London who travels out to Tennessee, would they know all the ins and outs of everything that happens in West Yorkshire? Would they be able to be an expert in that field? Would they be able to make the same trade agreements that Tracy Brabin, as a mayor, can do for her particular region? So it's going to be really, really important there. The other thing to say as well, on top of that, is you've now got, again, this advocate for what the local area needs. Tracy Brabin has secured kind of around £160 million from the government to create what they call an investment zone in West Yorkshire, and the government's given her this money with the idea that that investment zone is going to be focused on health tech. So what you've got here is you've got a local economic need in health tech for West Yorkshire, and now you've got a local advocate in the mayor who could really push and drive this forward even further. So in reply to this suggestion that we should have more mayors because they help local communities solve local issues, I think what I would say in reverse of that is that, perhaps the cost of these mayors actually outweighs the benefits that they bring to a local area. So to give you some context for this, it's estimated that the London Mayor and the Assembly cost London taxpayers around about £510 each. Now, can you imagine saying to a region who doesn't have a mayor, oh, by the way, everyone, go get yourself a mayor. Oh, it's only going to cost you £510 each a year. I think that would put a lot of people off, and they would say, well, hang on, actually, that doesn't outweigh the local benefits that it could bring. On top of that, here's a good case study from 2024. The election for the North East Mayoral Combined Authority cost $3 million alone, and that's before they even get into the kind of running costs on a yearly basis. So I think this is a really interesting argument to make here, which is that, yeah, we can say that they bring some local benefits to a region, but do those benefits actually outweigh the costs? When, remember, a lot of these areas, well, all of these areas already have local councils whose job it is to solve local issues and charge council tax. So I think that's an interesting point to make here. The benefits don't necessarily outweigh the cost to a community. So the final point I want to make here comes back to that government white paper, that the mayors have been a massive success because they lead to more visibility, and the communities now know who to hold accountable when things don't go well. So it used to be, before you had a mayor, you just imagine if you were in Manchester or Liverpool, it was really hard to know who to blame local problems on. You couldn't really blame local problems on the national government because, well, they were detached and they were too far away. If you're in somewhere like Manchester, which has got 15 different MPs or even more than that, again, who do you blame, and how do you have a coordinated strategy on things like homelessness? What the mayors have done is that they have meant you are getting someone to put forward a manifesto for change. They then have to go about and implement that, and then the local public know who's responsible for its success and know who to blame when it's not a success. The example of this, I think, comes from Tees Valley, where you've got a Conservative, Ben Houchen. Now, in 2024, Ben Houchen won re-election, and that was despite the fact that, firstly, there was a lot of controversy over the way that he'd been managing the funds of the Tees Valley Combined Authority, and also he won re-election at a time when the Conservative government was hugely unpopular and actually about to be voted out of office 2 months later. So he did really, really well. But voters had determined that Houchen had done a really good job. He created jobs, he brought money to the region, and so they duly re-elected him. What you've got here is you've got someone who is now more visible for local issues, saying, here's what I'm going to do. You may not like it, but I'm going to try and drive change in the area, I'm going to try and regenerate the area, and if you don't think I've done a good job, then you need to get rid of me. I think therefore Houchin is a great case study for visible leadership and accountability. Okay, so on the flip of that, what I would like to argue here is that it's all well and good saying that they increase visibility and accountability, but evidence suggests that actually the mayors really don't get held to account that much for what they do. A great example of this would be in London, where in the kind of 26 years since we've had a London mayor, only once has the incumbent mayor been defeated by a challenger. So in every other occasion where the incumbent mayor has stood for re-election, they have always won. And that kind of suggests to us that people aren't really voting because of the policies the mayor introduces. They're kind of voting probably just for the same political party they always do. Obviously, London's got quite a long track record now of voting for Labour MPs, but also voting for Labour mayors as well. And maybe that goes into people's minds. They're also voting for characters, which seemed to be what happened with Boris Johnson quite a lot. Now, what I would say as well is that we have seen examples where standing mayors have lost re-election. So certainly in 2024, the mayor of the West Midlands, Andy Street, who was a Conservative, he lost to Richard Parker, who was the Labour candidate. But even if we took that election, that was very much more about kind of national issues, where you had a really unpopular Conservative government, and Andy Street was being held to account really for the actions being taken by the national government rather than what he was doing in the West Midlands. I'd also like to say as well that turnout for these mayoral elections is just really, really poor. If you took that same West Midlands election where Andy Street lost to Richard Parker, turnout was just 30%. That's not really demonstrating that people are kind of widely enthusiastic for the mayors, and it also doesn't really demonstrate that they see this as an opportunity to hold mayors who are doing a poor job to account for what they've done. So what we'll do now is just think about some other points you might want to bring into this essay if you have some time. Thinking as well if the question is a little bit different, if the question is maybe just how successful are the mayors. Here's some other points that you might want to bring into it. I think the first one to say is that the mayors have provided this kind of local spokesperson in times of tragedy. So a really great example of this would come back from 2005, where you've got Ken Livingstone, and during the 7/7 bombings that took place on the underground and bus network, it was Ken Livingstone who kind of gave the response of Londoners. He was out in Singapore at the time, having just won the London Olympics, but the media actually took his statement. He was the one who went in front of the camera. And I think the same is true of Andy Burnham during the 2017 bombings of the Manchester Arena. Now, when you didn't have a mayor, it's really hard to know who the media needs to speak to and who can give a kind of professional account of how they feel and how the local citizens are feeling about something. You've now got this focal point, and they can provide this local spokesperson, to get across the message of the citizens at that point. And another point would be they provide local voice to stand up to government. Here, what you've got, a really good example would be Andy Burnham, who famously provided this really vocal level of opposition to the UK government during COVID. Now, on top of that as well, back in 2017, both Burnham and Andy Street, the West Midlands mayor, were really kind of combative when the government tried to scrap the electrification of the Manchester to Leeds railway line. Again, they kind of said to the government that's unacceptable, and the government relented in the face of opposition. So that opposition to central government, really, really good aspect of the mayoralty. It's been a huge success. You can also say as well they are generally quite popular. So if you look at opinion polls, 83% of people say that actually they like the mayor and they think that the mayor should be given more power. On the flip of that, however, it turns out most people don't actually know who their mayor is. So again, opinion polls show that maybe only 33% of voters could actually name who their local mayor is. That is actually a little bit better than the 8% of people who could name their kind of local council leaders. So it's better, but 33% is not great. It really goes to show that maybe people don't pay too much attention to what the mayor is doing. Anyway, that's this essay on the mayors. Obviously, you could get quite a few different things coming up here. It's probably just more likely to be something around how successful they've been the mayoralties, and whether or not they should go somewhat further. There's loads of different points you could make, but what I'd always stress is going back to the original point about the government white paper, and the government's white paper has laid out the reasons why we should have more mayors, and use that as your kind of starting point to formulate some arguments. Okay, good luck.